Sky here, owner of Sunshine Scents. Today's video is all about melt and pour soap and soap embeds. I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, and fun fact, when I started my soap business, I actually started with melt and pour soap. I eventually graduated to cold process soap only because melt and pour soap wasn't challenging enough for me. Not that cold process soap is super difficult to make, I just feel like I needed more of a challenge. I also found that I couldn't do complex designs and swirls with melt and pour soap. Melt and pour soap is great for beginners who are just starting out, but I've also seen some professional soap makers who have been in the game for years who only make melt and pour soap, and they make the most beautiful bars of soap. Melt and pour soap is still considered handcrafted soap and can still be challenging depending on your skill level. I'll also be making a few bars of melt and pour in this video. Now let's get into it. Before I make my batch of melt and pour soap, we need to talk about what exactly melt and pour soap is and the different bases it comes in. Melt and pour soap is a ready-made soap base composed of glycerin, oils, and other natural ingredients. It has already been saponified and already has the oils mixed in, leaving out any guesswork. It can be melted down using either a microwave or the double boiler method. Melt and pour soap is extremely kid-friendly as long as there's adult supervision, and I've even made some with my son a few times. Melt and pour soap is also cheaper and more cost-effective than cold process soap. When making cold process soap, you have to buy oils, lye, molds, plenty of equipment, fragrances, and colorants, so needless to say, this eventually all adds up. With melt and pour soap, the oils and lye are already mixed in the base, so you don't have to worry about buying any of those ingredients. You can go right to your local craft store and buy the pre-made soap base, which is way less expensive than having to pay for shipping for cold processed soap supplies. Another pro is that you don't have to wait forever for the soap to cure. I love making cold processed soap, but I have to admit, I find it so annoying having to wait 4 to 6 weeks just for the soap to cure. I can't use it or sell it until the soap has cured for at least 4 weeks, which can be a hassle, especially when I'm low on inventory or somebody places a wholesale order. With melt and pour soap, once it has dried in the mold, you can sell it or use it right after. Like I mentioned before, cold processed soap requires a lot of equipment, including a stick blender and several heat-safe containers, as well as gloves and goggles so you don't burn your skin. Melt and pour soap making requires minimal equipment, which can be great for somebody who is just starting out or doesn't have a lot of money to spend on equipment. As long as you have the melt and pour soap base, a soap mold, and optional ingredients like fragrances and colors, then you're good to go. The only major con I came across when making melt and pour soap is that it can be hard to do complex designs. Like I mentioned before, I've seen some melt and pour soap makers come up with some of the most beautiful designs, but I always found it hard to do complex swirls or frosted tops. I feel like with cold processed soap, it allows you more room to do whatever designs you want, and it's easier to add soap frosting to the top, whereas melt and pour soap, the only designs you can really do are layered ones. You can do swirls and frosting, but they definitely won't be anything complex. Another con is Glycerin Dew or sweating, which I'll be talking more about in a minute. When making melt and pour soap, the very first place to start is by choosing your soap base. There are 2 different types of melt and pour soap bases, white and glycerin. Clear melt and pour soap can come in bases including olive oil, aloe vera, and honey. The clear base I'll be using in this video is an olive oil base. Clear soap base dries quicker than white melt and pour soap base. Clear soap creates bright, vibrant colors. If you're looking to make a red, black, bright colored, or a neon colored soap, then you'll definitely want to use a clear soap base. White melt and pour soap base comes in a variety of bases including goat's milk, oatmeal, shea butter, and cocoa butter. The white base I'll be using in this video is cocoa butter. In my opinion, the white soap bases dry slower than the clear ones once melted. White melt and pour soap creates pretty pastel colors. For example, if you add red colorant to a white soap base, you'll end up with a pink color instead of all-out red. I get all of my melt and pour soap bases from Michael's, but I've also seen them on Amazon and Brambleberry. Melt and pour soap making calls for minimal ingredients. Besides the soap base, colorant, and fragrance oil, all you need is a soap mold, a heat-safe container, and rubbing alcohol. I'll explain why you need rubbing alcohol for melt and pour soap in a minute. When it comes to both melt and pour soap and cold process soap, I will always recommend using silicone soap molds. When I first started making melt and pour soap at the beginning, I was actually using plastic molds, and let me tell you, they were such a nightmare to use. They were super hard to unmold and tore up very easily. Silicone soap molds make the unmolding process 1,000 times easier, and they're way easier to clean, and I've had all of my silicone molds now for years. I'll be linking the silicone soap molds that I use in the description box. Before I make a batch of melt and pour soap, we need to talk about sweating, or what is more commonly known as glycerin dew. Glycerin dew is a common annoyance and occurrence when making melt and pour soap and occurs when moisture from the air comes in contact with the soap. Glycerin dew is not harmful and you can still use the soap with it on them. It's just not as pretty to look at. One way to combat glycerin dew is to use a low sweat soap base. If your completed bars of soap still have glycerin dew on them, you can just run a fan over the soap for a few hours. Overheating is another way you can be sure your melt and pour soap bars will have glycerin dew on them. When making melt and pour soap, you'll want to cut down the pieces evenly to make sure everything melts evenly. If making a large batch of melt and pour soap, microwave the base in 30-second bursts until everything is almost melted or completely melted. If you're making a smaller batch, start by microwaving in 15-second bursts. Make sure to pay attention to the base while it's microwaving and do not overheat. If your melt and pour soap is boiling in the microwave, this is not a good sign. If the base is too hot, your final look will result in a slimy bar of soap and oftentimes glycerin dew. We're now ready to start making melt and pour soap. First, measure and figure out how much melt and pour soap base you'll need. I'm not gonna lie, and this is going to sound really bad, but when making melt and pour soap, I actually don't mathematically measure how much base I'll need for the mold. I eyeball it, and then at the end I write down how much it took so that I know how much base to use the next time. I hope that made sense. This process is just less confusing and works well for me. If you'd rather mathematically measure your mold and soap base, then Katie Carson at Royalty Soaps has a great video on how she measures melt and pour for soap making. For this video, I'm only making 2 bars of soap, and I'm doing a 3-colored layered look using a clear olive oil soap base and a white cocoa butter soap base. Cut your base up evenly and melt it in the microwave in 30-second bursts. Make sure not to overheat. If you're doing a design with multiple colors or layers, don't microwave everything at once. Instead, melt one separate container at a time to avoid the other soap bases and the other containers hardening up. For example, I used 3 colors for this design using 2 different bases. I portioned off 3 separate containers of soap base and then melted them one by one. If you're doing a layered look, you'll need time for the layers to dry before adding in the next layer, so not melting all of the separate portions at once helps to make sure the other bases don't dry too quickly. Once you've poured the base into the mold, you'll want to spray it with rubbing alcohol. I use 99% rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol does several things. It pops the bubbles that often occur after pouring, and if making a layered design, it helps the layers stick together. I also spray the rubbing alcohol directly into my mixing container with the mica colorant to help the mica disperse evenly. If you're doing a layered design, you really want to make sure your layers are firm before adding the next layer. The layers don't have to be completely hard, but they should be firm when you press down on it. Make extra sure not to forget to spray in between the layers with rubbing alcohol to make sure the layers stick to each other. When making this soap, it took about 20 minutes for the first layer to be firm enough to where I could pour the next layer, and the middle layer took about 35 minutes. But as you'll see in a minute, I actually should have let the middle layer firm up some more. I also wanted to add to make sure you're moving pretty quickly when making melt and pour soap. If the soap base dries in the container, then you won't be able to remelt it and still have a beautiful looking soap bar. Now I'm adding the last layer. When you're done, don't forget to spray the top with rubbing alcohol to burst any air bubbles you see. Let them dry in the mold until they're completely firm and dry. In my experience, this usually takes anywhere from 1 to 2 hours depending on the type of mold you used. You can then unmold them once they're completely dry, and then you can go ahead and use them or sell them right away. Unlike cold process soap, there's no annoying cure time. Now I'm So as you can see, I definitely should have let the middle layer firm up a bit more, because when I added the final layer, some of it broke through the middle layer and seeped to the top layer, creating a paint splash look. It ended up still looking pretty cool, but I wanted a clean layered look and that didn't happen. So if you're making a layered melt and pour soap, just be sure your layers are completely dry before adding the next one. Soap embeds are a simple, easy way to create an interesting, eye-catching design. There are two types of soap embeds, melt and pour and cold process. I'll be talking more about cold process embeds in a minute, but melt and pour soap embeds are the most common type of embed. You can use melt and pour embeds on top of cold process soap without a problem. I use melt and pour embeds 95% of the time because they're way easier to make. You also don't have to worry about scenting the embeds because they're so small. When making melt and pour soap embeds, make sure not to over microwave the melt and pour soap base because the embeds can and will sweat. Like I mentioned earlier, sweat just means that they'll have little glycerin beads on them. However, this doesn't look very pretty when placed on top of the soap, so just make sure to keep an eye on the microwave. For a tiny amount of melt and pour soap, I would check every 4 to 5 seconds or so, and for larger amounts, I would check every 20 to 30 seconds. Also, don't reheat the soap embeds or put them in the freezer because there's a higher chance for sweat. Trust me, I know from experience. For pastel or light colored embeds, use white melt and pour soap. For neon, shimmery, red, black, or any other color that you really want to show up, use a clear melt and pour soap base. 95% of the time, I use clear soap instead of white to make my embeds because I like the embeds to stand out. To me, the embed molds are the best part of making soap embeds. I have so many embed molds. These aren't even half of them. You can find a mold in just about any shape, ranging from fruit, vegetables, crowns, chocolate, and a million other things. Again, I recommend using silicone molds because they're easier to unmold and clean. I'll be linking some of the ones I use in the description box for anybody who wants to check them out. You can also make cold process soap embeds, which can be a little trickier because they require you to make something called soap dough, and you still have to wait for them to cure. I might do a video on soap dough and how to make cold process soap embeds in the future, but for now I tend to just stick to melt and pour soap embeds because they're easier. Well, that's it for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I hope I was able to answer some questions about melt and pour soap and soap embeds. Feel free to check out my website linked in the description box for all your handcrafted skincare needs. I actually forgot how fun melt and pour soap making could be, so if anybody would like to see more melt and pour soap making videos, let me know. As always, thanks for watching.